Hey, warmer from the low! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got another conference preview edition on the podcast today we're looking at the Northeast Conference. Who better to have on this podcast than the NEC wizard himself, Ryan Peters. He does an amazing job over at Blue Ribbon Yearbook every single year, taking a look at the NEC over at Pioneer_Pride. Even though Sacred Heart has left the conference, he still does such an amazing job taking a look at all these teams in the NEC. We're going to be fleshing out these rosters in segment number 2. Have to take a look at the fact that New Haven joins the Division I ranks as well, so we are going to be doing that with Ryan. In the top of the show, in segment number 1, we're going to be taking a look at the styles and betting trends that we've got in the NEC, and then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector or finish for this fine conference. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you, for this podcast, you have one or two ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever. With EdgeBoost, they make sure that 100% of gambling transactions do get approved. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That'll get you a $1 match on your first deposit of up to $25. Now let's get down to business. Let's take a look at an NEC that, if you're a fan of offense, this might not be quite the conference for you. I do hate to say it, but there were a lot of teams that were very much more defense-oriented. Looking at you, Wagner, as Wagner, in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis last year, 357th in all of college basketball. They weren't the worst team in the conference in terms of scoring, though. Chicago State, 361st in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis. So, obviously, those two teams were bringing up the rear in terms of being able to give you a lot of production. And you did have a lot of teams that were well outside the top 250 with regards to their overall point scoring, their points scored on a per-possession basis. LIU was 318th, but they made up for that on the defensive side of things as well. We'll be diving into that in a minute. So, you do have a lot of teams looking to be able to improve with that regard. You had St. Francis of Pennsylvania, team that made the NCAA tournament, and they've got one more year in this conference. They were 298th in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis. Fairleigh Dickinson, 293rd in the country with this regard. Mercier's 287th. So, I think that you guys are understanding the point here that this was very much a defense-oriented conference. And with these teams, they didn't necessarily do the world's worst job with regards to their two-point shooting. It just comes down to the fact that you have a lot of teams in this conference that they don't really emphasize being able to pop it and lock it from three-point range. Even Fairleigh Dickinson, that a few years ago, they were such a great three-point shooting team. They were just 262nd in all of college basketball with regards to their three-point shooting percentage last season. For Wagner, surprisingly, they weren't completely awful from three-point range, 286th when you compare it to the fact that they're in the bottom 15 in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis. You're thinking, not necessarily too bad there, but obviously, St. Francis, Pennsylvania, they were an okay three-point shooting team, 178th in all of college basketball. With that regard, LIU was 338th, but again, we're going to talk about the defense in this conference. They were very stout, and they were very rock-solid there, and that is what is going to win out for a lot of these teams in the NEC. With Wagner, even though they are a team that they just had a tough time of being able to put the biscuit in the basket, year in and year out, they always find themselves in the top 100 with regards to defense, 88th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis. And if you look at just a road/neutral court environment for Wagner, they were a top 45 team in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis. A lot of these defenses in the NEC actually do a really good job of traveling, so that has always been a hallmark of so many of these teams. With LIU, they were much improved on defense. Cyril Gillian, who came over after being the Chicago State head coach for quite a few years, and Chicago State, by the way, not necessarily one of those strong defensive teams, by the way, in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis, 333rd in all of college basketball. As LIU, 45th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis. So pretty solid, pretty rock solid there. Central Connecticut was actually the team that ran the conference during the regular season. They were obviously obviously one of your better offensive teams in the conference, but they were number 7 in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And if you look at things in a road/neutral court venue, number 5 in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So a lot of relatively rock solid teams here. Now, with regards to the offense as well, you didn't have a lot of teams that did an amazing job of being able to give you second and third chance opportunities. Wagner was not bad with their offensive rebounding. They were about 111th in all of college basketball in terms of percentage of their missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound. LIU was about 100, so a lot of these teams that they were able to climb towards the top of the conference, they were able to grab a few second and third chances. For Central Connecticut, they were more around about 266. They were a little bit of an outlier with that regard, but a lot of these teams that they were able to do a pretty solid job. They were able to grab some second and third chances. St. Francis, 303rd with regards to percentage of missed shots that turned into an offensive rebound. Chicago State obviously was one of those teams that they didn't grab a lot of offensive rebounds. 346th in all of college basketball with that regard. Stone Hill has become a very interesting team in this conference. They were 278th with that regard as well, but a lot of these teams that they were able to ascend as well, they did a nice job in terms of not allowing you to have a second or third chance with regards to being able to corral your missed shots. As Wagner, once again, 11th in the country in terms of defensive rebound percentage. Teams only grabbed 22.8% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. That's a big reason why they're always towards the top of the conference. Central Connecticut, who I was alluding to before, 24th in the country. Teams rebounded 23.5% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. LIU was 42nd with this regard, so once again, these teams that were towards the top of the conference, they were able to do a pretty solid job in terms of being able to corral offensive rebounds, in terms of not allowing a lot of second and third chances. And then you have a team like a Fairleigh Dickinson that they play one of the more harebrained styles in this conference. They were just 278th with regards to their defensive rebound percentage. Stone Hill was a team that was a little bit hit or miss with this regard as well, along with St. Francis of Pennsylvania. St. Francis of Pennsylvania, 233rd with this regard. Stone Hill, they were 205th, so few issues there. And then when it comes to the overall tempo in college basketball, you had a lot of slower teams out there in the NEC. Now, Fairleigh Dickinson, even with the coaching changes that they have undertaken over the last few seasons, still always one of those teams that they play faster than most of the other NEC teams. For Fairleigh Dickinson, 120th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. That doesn't sound like they're going at warp speed, but when you compare it to Wagner, it was 362nd out of 364 Division I teams. Yeah, they're playing relatively fast. LIU really slowed things down last year. They were 290th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. St. Francis of Pennsylvania was one of those neither here nor there teams. In terms of the NEC standards, they were a little bit faster at about 230th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And Stone Hill, they were another one of those slow controlled teams, 331st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So you have a lot of teams that they're looking to play a little bit more methodically. Mercyhurst in their first year at the Division I level, 348th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So they were a perfect fit for this conference as well. So you've got a lot of teams that they're really looking to play a little bit more of a slow, controlled style, and you've seen that with the totals over the last few years. This has been one of your best under conferences in all of college basketball. And you've got a lot of teams that they don't necessarily pop it and lock it from three-point range, and have a lot of teams that are outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game. It makes it very, very hard to get overs. Now, bookmakers have adjusted. You'll notice in a lot of those Wagner games last year, you're seeing totals that were 120 or lower, and with Wagner, even with those low totals, how about 18 unders, 8 overs, and a push? They are one of your best under teams in all of college basketball. 69.2%, very nice to the under last season. As you take a look at top under teams in all of college basketball, only Michigan State, West Virginia, and UMKC, the Kangaroos, played a higher percentage of their games to the under last season. And you had a few other teams that were pretty demonstrative to the under. LIU, 19 unders to 12 overs, 61.3% right there. And then Fairleigh Dickinson, 19 unders to 11 overs. Now you had two teams that were very good to the over. St. Francis of Pennsylvania, that's because they were one of the faster teams in the NEC, 20 overs to 11 unders. And then Lemoyne, 24 overs to 7 unders. Well, you've got one of the best under teams in all of college basketball in this conference. Lemoyne was just absolutely printing to the over. Number 1 team in the country to the over, because they were the one team that could get you sped up. They had a few games that went to overtime that was able to help out with regards to some of those totals as well. And then the rest of the conference was relatively ho-hum. Mercyhurst, 16 overs to 12 unders. Stone Hill, 17 overs to 14 unders. Chicago State, 17 overs to 15 unders. Central Connecticut, 14 overs to 6 unders. overs. And then you had LIU, I mentioned before, 19 unders to 12 overs. Obviously, we don't have any numbers with regards to New Haven because they're a new Division I team. But that said, when you take a look at against the spread results for the NEC, obviously this is a lower level of competition, to say the least, in comparison to most teams out there in Division I. But other than Lemoyne, who just got trucked out of conference, 10 and 21 against the spread. A lot of these teams were relatively solid. Wagner had a rough go of it. In non-conference play, they just couldn't find their bearings. 10 and 17 against the spread. You had Stone Hill go 12, 17 and 1 against the spread, but Central Connecticut was an absolute machine outside the conference. 20 and 10 against the spread. Fairleigh Dickinson was 19 and 11 against the spread. Merciers 17, 10 and 1 against the spread. LIU 18, 11 and 2 against the spread. St. Francis of Pennsylvania 18 and 13 against the spread. And Chicago State, somewhat respectable, 15 and 17 against the spread. And this all goes back to the fact that a lot of these teams as underdogs were able to do a nice job. Wagner was not one of them, 4 and 10 against the spread as an underdog. Lemoyne 7 and 15 against the spread as an underdog, but Central Connecticut 5 and 1 against the spread in the underdog role. Fairleigh Dickinson 14 and 5 against the spread as an underdog. LIU 10, 5 and 1 against the spread as an underdog. Merciers 15, 9 and 1 against the spread as an underdog. And then St. Francis of Pennsylvania 13 and 10 against the spread as an underdog. Chicago State, I mentioned that they went 15 and 17 against the spread overall this past season. As an underdog, 15 and 17 against the spread. They were not a favorite in any game last season. So, yeah, that was a little bit rough for them, but a lot of the success that these teams have as an underdog comes into play with regards to the fact that these teams were solid on the road. The NEC doesn't have a ton of travel except for when these teams have to go to the great state of Illinois. Most of these teams, as you can tell from it being the NEC conference, they're based out there in the northeast part of the country. Lemoyne was miserable, 5 and 13 against the spread on the road. That was rough. Stone Hill was 5 and 10 and 1 against the spread on the road as well. Wagner 6 and 10 against the spread on the road, but then you had Central Connecticut 12 and 3 against the spread on the road. Fairleigh Dickinson 13 and 6 against the spread on the road. LIU 10, 5 and 1 against the spread on the road. St. Francis 11 and 8 against the spread on the road, and then Mercyhurst 9, 8 and 1. Chicago State 10 and 10. So very interesting conference to say the least. Lots of slow play, lots of defense, not necessarily a ton of offense, but a man that is going to be on the offensive to be able to give us such great insight with regards to this conference. Ryan Peters, he does such an amazing job at Blue Ribbon and so much more. He joins me next right here on Cuscus with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, the NEC Conference Preview Edition. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to have this man aboard for our NEC preview, as he is the NEC master. It's Ryan Peters aboard. He does such a tremendous job year in and year out with his Blue Ribbon Yearbook for the NEC. He does a lot of work for the NEC with regards to their website. NECcovertime.wordpress is a great resource as well. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter /X at Pioneer_Pride. And Ryan, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
My pleasure, Greg. I enjoy doing this every offseason with you, and let's do it again.
Yes, absolutely. And how about if we start with the newest team in the conference? That would be New Haven, a little bit of an unknown team that was below 500 at the Division II level. They do lose a lot of guys from last season. So what can you tell us about a bunch that they're going to be making the leap up from the Division I level? But as we know in the NEC, a lot of these teams that have come up from the D2 ranks to the Division I level, they have found some immediate success.
They have, but New Haven's a little bit different in that they're replacing 12 of their 13 scholarships. So they have a pretty much new team. If you're Ted Hodling, he did bring back Najami George, who should be front and center, part of the New Haven's attack. Had a really good freshman year in the NE10 last year. That's Division II. Was an all-rookie team recipient. Guy was really good cutting without the ball, driving, getting to the rim, finishing through contact and transition. He's a really good player, but Ted Hodling had a really difficult job this offseason. He pretty much had to rebuild a roster, build a Division I schedule, and hire a staff all by himself. So he brings in some transfers. I'm looking at, Jabri Fitzpatrick. He comes from non-Division I. I think he's a guy who's going to basically, have a, pretty good role on this team. He had, 20 points per game at Felician University last year, scored in double figures in 15 of 16 games, broke 20 points multiple times. I think he's going to be really good, especially in the pick and roll. They have a couple other guys. Andre Pasha, he comes from community college. He's a double-double machine there, very efficient inside the arc. Stefano Falapa, who's basically coming from Tennessee Martin. He once averaged, 10, 6, and 2 at the non-Division One level. He's an Italy native. So they have a lot of unknowns on this team, Greg. I think we're going to learn a lot about New Haven going, about a month into the season, because they're not like Merrimack, they're not like Lemoyne, they're not like Stonehill. Like those teams, when they went from the NE10 to the NEC, they had a lot of veteran leadership and talent on that team to kind of get into Division One, and they were successful in their first year. New Haven is kind of a complete rebuild here for Ted Hodling.
Yeah, I do think that's going to be relatively difficult for New Haven. And when you're below 500 at the Division Two level, going up to the Division One ranks, that's not the easiest ask to say the least. And this is not going to be an easy ask for Central Connecticut, who really busted out last year. It was an amazing year for them. They're going to have to replace a lot of those players from a season ago, but they do still have some of these guys from a season ago, someone like a Darren Smith. They're certainly going to be looking at in the backcourt. They did a solid job of bringing in some non-Division One guys, some other transfers via the portal. And I know you've talked about this coach quite a bit on this podcast, Patrick Sellers. He got things rocking and rolling for Central Connecticut. I think 14-2 might be difficult to duplicate in the NEC, but Sellers certainly knows how to put a team together, and he certainly knows how to coach up defense.
Right now, Central Connecticut's my number 2 team in the preseason. That's saying a lot, given that they've lost a lot of guys like, Devin Hade and Jordan Jones and Abdul Momo. All those guys either graduated or they up transferred to another school. But, you mentioned Darren Smith. He was really efficient as a rookie. I think he could take another step with a higher possession rate. One guy I'm really high on, and the Central Connecticut staff is really high on, is Max Frazier. Super athletic. He was a Siena transfer a couple seasons ago. He was kind of buried on the bench behind Jaden Brown and Abdul Momo, but he's super athletic. He's really playing well, and he has a chance to be the leading scorer for the Blue Devils at the 5 position for them. So you talk about Smith, you talk about Frazier. Jay Rogers has been injured for the last 2 years with knee and hip issues, but he's an old school guard who has had success at Central Connecticut once upon a time. He's kind of a downhill driver, a good complement to a lot of the guys who could shoot from the outside. And then you mentioned the transfers for, Pat Sellers. He's done a really good job finding the right transfers, especially from the non-Division One level. He brings in Nico Ashley from Les McRae. That's a Division Two. I think he's going to have an impact as kind of a 6'7" senior who could get up and block shots. Pat Sellers describes him as a pogo stick. Gabe Spinelli, he brings over from Chicago State, really athletic guard who could kind of, run the point. He could shoot the 3. He could get downhill. So there's going to be some guys on this team. I'm pretty confident in Pat Sellers, given that he's now had back-to-back 20-win seasons at Central Connecticut. This is a program that was in trouble for a long time, but Pat Sellers has brought them back, and they are in contention every single year, and I expect this year to be the same.
Yep, absolutely. He has done an incredible job, and for Central Connecticut, the rise has been very, very nice for them. And this school has been a little bit different than most teams out there in the NEC, because I think you'd agree with me, a lot of the schools in the NEC, they're very slow, very controlled. Fairleigh Dickinson, even though they had the coaching change to Jack Hasselberry a few seasons ago, they've been able to maintain that up-tempo style, and I think that they're going to be an interesting team for this year, because they do replace quite a bit of the backcourt, but they're bringing a guy into Shaw Jackson, who I know that he had some success a few seasons ago over at VMI. They've got a guy in Noah Melson, who's a 6'6", do-it-all sort of player. They've got a little bit more size than when they won their games in the NCAA tournament a few seasons ago. It was Surreal Martinoff coming on in as well, so I find it interesting to see how this Fairleigh Dickinson team is going to be able to form themselves, because this is probably the tallest team that we've ever seen from Fairleigh Dickinson.
They have a lot of length. There's no question about it. But, Fairleigh Dickinson is like a lot of these NEC teams, right? They get ravaged by the transfer portal, and then they have to kind of rebuild through the transfer portal. And that's exactly what Jack Hasselberry had to do this year. He had a lot of guys leave, a lot of talented players, guys like Terrence Brown, who went to Utah, and Joel Emmanuel left as well. So he's giving the keys to a lot of guys that have never played at FDU, and a lot of these guys have never had Division I success, but they've been successful at other levels. You mentioned Jackson. I think he's definitely a sleeper. He's a guy who's going to get it on the glass, a high rebounding rate guy. Didn't have much of a role at Northern Colorado, but I think he can definitely down transfer and have some success at FDU. Joey Niesman, I think, is going to be a successful guard. He was efficient at McKendree, which is a non-Division I institution. He's a guy who could kind of do it all. He could kind of run the point. He could get downhill, get into the paint, get some paint touches. make a floater, also kick it out to a shooter. He's kind of a winner, as described by Jack Castleberry. And then guys like Arthur Cox coming from West Virginia State, just statistically solid, really good five-man. You could run the offense through. He's got a high IQ. He could pass the ball out of the post. He could run the floor. He does a little bit of everything. And then you mentioned Melson and Parnell, the kid from Hofstra. Those are floor spacing guys. Those are guys who have had a little bit of success at the Division I level, and you give them a bigger role now at FDU, maybe they could flourish. So it's a lot of wait and see with this FDU team. Their non-conference schedule is always brutal. They have 8 guaranteed games, I believe, coming up this year. That is typically the norm for them. So they're going to get beat up quite a bit in the non-conference, but come January, this could be a team that definitely contends.
Absolutely, and we know that style in general just lends itself to a lot of open looks from three. As joining me on the show, we do have Ryan Peters. He does such a great job covering the NEC, joining me right here on the NEC Conference Preview Edition of Coast to Coast Hoops. And this was the newcomer last offseason in the NEC in Chicago State, in which it was a rough season for them, but the good news is they returned quite a bit of continuity. Noble Crawford along Deshaun Jean-Charles, two very nice versatile pieces are back. You've got Troy McCoy Jr. as well, and then he's back in the state of Illinois. Marcus Tankersley, who began his career at Detroit last year, had a solid season over at Elkhorn State. He's going to be back there. He's going to be playing for Chicago State. You've got a lot of interesting pieces. Marcus Watson, I think, is going to be playing a nice role in the backcourt as well. And for Chicago State, they took their lumps last season, but feels like even though they might not be like a conference contender or anything like that, they should be able to take some nice strides forward here this year.
Yeah, Landon Bussey takes over from Alcorn State, and he was really successful in the SWAC. Let's not, diminish his accomplishments at the Division I level. 2 regular season championships, 2 NIT appearances, a 59-26 conference record in the SWAC. Yeah, he wasn't very successful in the SWAC tournament in terms of trying to get to the NCAA tournament, but he always put his teams in positions to win, and I think he's going to do that at Chicago State. You mentioned Tankersley. He comes over from Alcorn State with him. Tankersley's a really talented player. He's a guy who's an inside out type of guard. He's really working on his perimeter shooting this offseason to kind of diversify his game and his skill set a little bit. Tank Bernard comes over from Ryder. He played with Bussey once upon a time at Alcorn State. He is just a dynamo on the glass. He could get it offensive and the defensive glass, also efficient inside the arc and good in a small sample in the pick and roll. And then you got some guys like, Chauncey Gibson, who, came from Prairie View A&M. Once upon a time, he was kind of a high-level recruit. So, Bussey's trying to kind of optimize his talent and try to get the best out of him. So you got some guys here. You mentioned Deshaun Jean-Charles. He's kind of a defensive-minded wing, but at 6'6", he kind of fits the Bussey style, which is kind of get in your face, half-court defensive battle, be physical, win the rebounding margin, and just make life really difficult for the other team when they're trying to run offensive possessions. CJ Delancey, can he get any more out of him? I think that CJ, back when he was at LIU and he had a productive freshman year, can he return to that role where he was a rim protector at the 5, also a really good offensive rebounder, he got plenty of offensive putbacks. That's going to be a goal for Bussey, but I think Chicago State's going to be much better now with him at the helm.
Yep, I do agree with you. And the fact that he was able to bring over some guys from the SWAC who had some pretty good success at the SWAC level, I think that is going to be massive for them as well. Let's talk about a team that I feel like it's about as tried as true as it gets. If you're looking for Wagner to put up offensive numbers like Alabama, you're probably going to be disappointed. If you love good, hard, tenacious defense, well, this is a school for you. As for Wagner, they do lose quite a few pieces from a season ago, but I love the way that they mix and match. Xavier Fitch, 6'7", big man, he's going to be one of the main holdovers from a season ago. They bring in Travis Gray from Florida International, who had a little bit of success out there at the Conference USA level as well. He should be able to help out. I like the overall versatility of this team. Lots of guys that stand right around like 6'6", 6'7". They're going to have a little bit of issue, in my opinion, perhaps at the point guard spot. Dorian Nick Jones is going to need to take over the mantle there. But that said, with Wagner, they've got a lot of guys that are going to be able to defend. And this team, once again, in my opinion, is going to be really good on the glass.
Yeah, defense is always first and foremost if you're, Donald Copeland. And I mentioned Landon Bussey at Chicago State. Bussey and Copeland are very similar, I think, in their styles of play. They want to grind it out in a half court. They want to, make it really difficult defensively, get those live ball turnovers and try to convert into easy offense on the other end. And so Wagner, like every year with Copeland, with Bashir Mason in the past, they're built the same way here, tough-minded kids who are really going to get after it defensively. And like Fairleigh Dickinson, they're kind of a complete unknown because, as you mentioned, they have, many of their guys coming back are transfer portal guys or guys who are not wearing the Wagner uniform last year. 11 of the 13 scholarships are brand new. You mentioned Nick Jones, Copeland called him a baller, a guy who could do a little bit of everything at the guard spot. Jaden Baker comes over from Frostburg State, Division II, averaging 19 points a game. He's a guy who, is described as a really versatile scorer, kind of that three-level scorer. Then you have a bunch of guys like you just don't know how they're going to, react to Division I. Eduardo Placer comes from Daytona State. He was at USC Upstate back in the day, so he does have a little Division I experience. Very crafty 6'5" junior shooting guard, so he could do a little bit of everything. I think versatility and length, as you mentioned, a lot of guys on this roster between 6'5" and 6'7". That was kind of the recruiting goal for Copeland, is to kind of recruit these types of guys. Versatility wise, they could defend 1 through 5. Any guy on the floor can do that. So they're going to get after you. Again, they're going to put a lot of ball pressure on you once you cross half court, and it's going to be the same old Wagner team. The question is, as you brought up, can they score? And we'll have to find out with this new roster.
And I talked about it a little bit before. A lot of these teams that have come up from the Division II level to the D1 ranks have had immediate success. And Mercyhurst was third in the conference last year at 9-7. The problem is a lot of those guys last year were seniors, and a lot of them have moved on. So Mykolas Ivanauskis, 6'8", little bit of a combo player. He's going to need to step up for this team. They're going to be looking to Jake Lulleman, who was able to give them a bit of production in the backcourt. They also bring back Deshaun Jackson Jr. And other than that, they do lose so much from a season ago. So I think that's going to be interesting to see this Mercyhurst team and how they really deal with transition with losing a lot of those pieces that were so successful for them a season ago.
I mean, one thing that does help Gary Manchel out quite a bit is, Bernie Blunt did test the waters in the transfer portal, but he decided to come back to Mercyhurst. So he's going to be their feature scorer at the 1, at the 2 for the Lakers. They're going to be very interesting with Bernie Blunt. I think he's a preseason all-conference first-teamer because he has that type of talent. He's a kid who, finished 9th nationally in free throw percentage, had 25 starts, really good steal rate, improved his three-point field goal percentage, can get downhill in a hurry because he's lightning quick. He's going to be the focal point of the offense. But then you mentioned, those sophomores are big. Lenneman, who had, really good three-point shooter last year as a freshman, but now he has to take a step. Ivanauskis is another intriguing stretch 4, 5-man, 6'8", who's got a lot of talent, a very good rebounder with solid shooting percentages. Deshaun Jackson's very defensive oriented. His defensive metrics are really good last year, but now he's got to improve it on the offensive end. So they have a bunch of guys, at least guys who have been, with Manchel for at least a year, who kind of know that system. That's going to help them with that matchup zone because the matchup zone needs repetition. They need continuity to get better each and every year. They really struggled with that last year. They had a lot of newcomers. The matchup zone wasn't as good defensively at the Division I level. So he's going to make some tweaks and try to figure things out. But having that continuity is certainly going to help, the Mercyhurst compete in year 2.
Yep, I think that it's really going to be able to help them out as well, and it's going to be interesting to see how they have a little bit of transition in the backcourt, how they're going to be able to maneuver with that, and I think that this team is going to be very fascinating as well. As we've got ourselves a lot of intrigue out there in the NEC, and Ryan Peters, he does such a great job of covering this conference. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. Says it's the swan song for St. Francis. As we know, Rob Kimbrell, he steps down at the end of the year, but I think that they might bring in one of the best transfers in this conference. That'd be Skylar, aka Sky Wicks, at Incarnate Word 2 years ago. This guy was an absolute machine, just unfortunately could not get out there on the floor for UTSA last season, but in a conference where 6'6" is pretty big, that's going to be big for them. Cameron Tweedy, he was part of that Fairleigh Dickinson team that knocked off Purdue in the NCAA tournament. You've got Zion Russell in the backcourt, and for St. Francis, they don't have quite the same pieces that they had when they made the NCAA tournament last season, but it feels like a team that they're going to be able to go as far as Sky Wicks can take them in what is going to be their last year in this conference.
Yeah, to start, shout out to Rob Krimmel. He had a great run at St. Francis, and I was so happy for him to be able to go out on a high note. Obviously, having the program switch to Division III for next year is not what he wanted, but for him to finally get to the NCAA tournament after so many close calls of getting to the NEC finals, I thought that was perfect for kind of the end of his St. Francis career. He did really, really a great job, being able to recruit and retain kids in Loretto, PA is not an easy thing to do, but he's kind of embraced that culture aspect. And I think his assistant, the guy who was hired to replace him, Luke McConnell, is going to do that. Luke's been a long-time assistant under Krimmel. As you mentioned, they have a pretty new roster as well. I do like Skylar Wicks a lot. He's been described by McConnell as a 3-level scorer, but also a kid with great character, a kid who has the potential to kind of carry that scoring load for the Red Flash. Ahmed Harrison, Zion Russell. Russell's interesting because he previously played at Division I, Northern Illinois, then Niagara. Had a pretty efficient year last year at Niagara, just didn't play a ton. But you kind of give him a little more playing time, you call a few more plays for him, and he could be a dynamic point guard, off the ball guard for St. Francis and Luke McConnell. And then it was also big for McConnell to bring on Chris Moncrief. He was pretty much the only guy that returned. Him and Justin Liberius were the main guys who come back from last year's roster. Liberius is kind of a big traditional five-man, was injured last year, so he didn't play, but he has some talent with a back-to-the-basket game. Chris Moncrief, though, is huge because he's a great two-way player. He was getting better near the end of last season. He was so critical in St. Francis's NCAA tournament run. They need a big season out of Chris Moncrief if they want to make some noise in Northeast Conference.
Yep, they are going to need a big year out of him, but I do feel like there's a lot of upside with this team, and I love the fact that Lemoyne, they bring back quite a bit from a season ago. It was a little bit of an up and down season for them, but Zach Tekken, who I still remember 2 seasons ago when he was out there in the Metro Atlantic for Siena, had a nice season, has just dealt with the injuries over the last 2 seasons. He's back for the team. Nate Fouts, one of their top scorers from a year ago. He's going to be returning as well. They've got other guys like Trent Mascara, who I think is very interesting, and one of the more interesting names in all of college basketball, Tennessee Rainwater, comes on over from the WAC. Obviously a very interesting name, and a guy that should be able to give them something down low. I think that this is a fascinating Lemoyne team that they've got a lot of guys that they stand right around 6'6", 6'8". I anticipate them being much better on the glass this year than they were a season ago.
Yeah, the thing with Lemoyne and Nate Champion that I've been impressed with their first 2 years in the Northeast Conference is, offensively, they've always been really good. And they had 2 different teams last year and the year before that. Year before that, they had mainly a shooting team. So they were jump shooting. The schemes were kind of set up to optimize those shooters and get them open looks on the perimeter. Last year was kind of more of a slashing team, a team that kind of did, their dirty work inside and were really efficient. So I'm curious about this new team. You mentioned the guys that returned. Nate Fouts, I think, is ready to take a big step now. Averaged about 9 and 5 last year and shot like 53% from inside the arc. I think if he could take that efficiency and kind of make that next step where he's basically one of the highest possession rate guys on Lemoyne, I think he could have a good year. You mentioned Mascara, had a pretty decent year last year, but he did miss 23 games due to an ankle. He's come back healthy and he should be good to go. Really high IQ player, can pass the ball, can also shoot it a little bit. And Dang Garang kind of came out of nowhere last year. He's like this, I don't want to say raw, but he's this really athletic swingman in the NEC. He came on and averaged 49% from 3, 93% from the free throw line, averaged 8 points, seemingly out of nowhere, middle of the season. And he's going to be kind of the wild card for Lemoyne, I think, to kind of help maybe get these guys going and get them back into the upper half of the conference.
And I think this team is a wild card with the way that their offense is structured. That'd be Stonehill. They do have to replace Todd Brogna, who was a really nice, versatile piece for them last year. But you know all too well about this guy, Raymond Espinal Guzman, because he began his career over at Sacred Heart. He's going to be coming in as a 6'8", do-it-all sort of guy. Chaz Stinson was a big part of that backcourt last season. I really think Will Batchelor, who 2 years ago, when he was at Holy Cross, was a solid three-point shooter, was a solid guard. Him coming in is big. They took a swing on a few guys that were injured last year, Rex Sutherland being one of the biggest of them. But I look at this Stonehill team, and I really like the backcourt. I've got a few question marks down low. Corey Lovell at 6'10", probably going to need to step up. But for the Stonehill team, it looks like they're one of the most well put together offenses in the conference.
I really like the Stonehill team. I have them third right now in my preseason. You talked about the guys they're bringing in, but the guys that come back, I think Herman Kofi, the sophomore, he was an all-conference rookie team recipient last year. I think he's got player of the year potential for this year. He's just super efficient, does everything right on the floor, really good defensive player to the point where Chris Krause could not take him off the floor last year. He was that good. And when he makes threes, he was fairly efficient last year at 37%. He's really good. I think he's going to take a step up. Chaz Stinson, statistically, he's not going to wow you with like double digits in points, but he does a lot of the little things really well. He could also pass the ball. The ball never sticks in his hands. Again, a good defensive player. Like he can embrace the physicality at 6'4", playing off the ball as an off the ball guard. Ian Muser, I think, is ready to take that step as kind of that stretch forward for Stonehill. So they have a trio of guys coming back that are really intriguing. But then you mentioned, Batchelder coming from Holy Cross was really productive there for a while. Did not play last year, so it'll be interesting to see how he does off the layoff, but he's certainly talented as kind of a combo guard. Rex Sutherland from New Hampshire, another defensive-minded guy who could get out and transition and play, really good defense on the wing. And then, you mentioned Espanol Guzman. He's going to be a guy who came over from Sacred Heart, was a backup player last year, mainly to Tanner Thomas and, Anquan Hill. Can he step up and kind of be that, five man that they could run a little bit of offense through? He's a guy who could really run the floor, great rim runner, especially in transition. So they got a lot of intriguing pieces. I like what Chris Krause has done in this offseason, but now you have to play the games and see if it works out.
And then we've got one last team to talk about, and this is the team that I think is going to win the conference. That would be LIU. Hot Rod Strickland, and the fact that they brought in Gerald Gillian last offseason, they have really been able to elevate. And what I think is so big for them, they had a 15-plus point per game scorer, Malachi Davis, stay with the team. I know that he was exploring his options. He sticks around. You get in a guy in Greg Gordon, who I remember 2 years ago at Iona was a nice double-figure scorer. Couldn't really get out there with UAB last year, but now he comes in, fresh sort of take on life. Isaiah Miranda is a former top 250 recruit, really didn't stick with Oklahoma State. UW Green Bay was a disaster, but now he comes in at 7'1". He's going to be one of the tallest guys in the conference, and that helps out Shadrach Lassou, who was so good down low. I look at this LIU team, and not only do I think that they're going to be good in the NEC, I think those bye games that they have, they're going to be feistier than a lot of people expect, and I think that this team is going to make some noise nationally.
Yeah, they are my number one, preseason number one. I think that's to no one's surprise. Most people have that. Returning Malachi Davis is definitely a big, coup for Rod Strickland. 18 points a game last year, led LIU in scoring, steals, free throw percentage, had 26 games in double figures. He was their guy late in the games who had the ball in his hands and was unafraid to make those big plays. Jamal Fuller was a revelation last year down low, 6'5" senior, a little bit undersized, but does a little bit of everything. Really good shooter. Really good rebounder, had a terrific year. He comes back. You mentioned Lassou. He was a fantastic freshman, and he's a perfect complement to Fuller and Davis because he does all the dirty work for you. He's going to rebound. He's going to block shots. He's going to set the pick. He's going to run the floor, and he doesn't need to he doesn't need to have offense called for him, so he's a perfect complement to those guys. And then the biggest question is, you mentioned these guys, Greg Gordon, you bring him in. He's, been kind of mercurial at times. He left Iona prematurely. He left UAB prematurely. Can Rod Strickland get the best out of him? Because we know he's super talented. Once upon a time, he averaged double figures with Iona and Tobin Anderson. So can you get him going? I really like Jomo Goings. He had a productive 4 years at Slippery Rock, averaged 17 a game last year. And then Isaiah Miranda comes over after, being a Georgia Tech signee and then having a cup of coffee with Green Bay last year. He left the team prematurely, Doug Gottlieb's team. So can Strickland get the most out of Miranda? It's going to be interesting because Strickland got the most out of Malachi Davis last year, and he's trying to perform the same type of magic on Miranda and Gordon. Based on Strickland's track record and the success he had last year, I would not bet against him. I think this is the best team in the Northeast Conference.
Yep, I am right there with you. And I mean, the way that they got brought in a few former top 250, former top 300 recruits, they've got a lot of talent there. And a man with a lot of talent in terms of taking a look at basketball is you, Ryan. You do an absolutely magnificent job over there with the NEC. I know you're working on your Blue Ribbon Yearbook write-up for this conference, and I know you do a great job all throughout the year covering the NEC. So let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I actually just finished my Blue Ribbon previews.
Perfect.
I did the entire NEC, and I did close to half of the NEC schools like St. Peter's, Iona, Sacred Heart, Merrimack, and Siena. So we're excited. So yeah, go out and get the Blue Ribbon book. It's the best college yearbook in the offseason that you could buy. And yeah, I'm excited to join the NEC once again and kind of help them out on the blog, do some broadcasts with them. I do Wagner basketball when the season starts at their home game. So just looking forward to college basketball. We're getting there. We're getting closer. Still have a little bit of time to go. But the fact that you and I, Greg, are talking means we can't be too far away.
Absolutely. And Ryan, he always joins me for the NEC preview. He always delivers on this podcast. Did so once again today. So a big thanks to Ryan for joining me on Coast to Coast Seats, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming next, I present to you my projector finish for the NEC. And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. it is always great to be able to get the master of the NEC aboard, a man that does a great job of taking a look at this great conference in Ryan Peters. He does a tremendous job year in and year out with his Blue Ribbon Yearbook for this conference, and every single time he joins me, as he has joined me quite a bit for this conference preview, he always delivers the goods, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Ryan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the NEC as per usual, because I am doing a conference preview. Any of the news and notes that we had in college basketball the previous day, those will be taken care of on the podcast tomorrow. I always want to give as much sparkle and shine to these conference previews as humanly possible. Want to make sure that these teams get the love that they so rightfully deserve, and we are going to do so once again today. So, but if we do take a look at my projector or finish, and at dead last, I hate to do it, but I have to go with New Haven here. It's just so rough to have a team that was 12-17 at the non-Division I level last year and have any sort of expectations for them whatsoever. And they had a bunch of seniors on their roster last year as well. It's not like they're bringing back a lot of these guys that were double-figure scorers for them. So, that's where the real issue is here with this New Haven bunch, as they pretty much lose 4 of their top 5 scorers from a season ago. So, they are really going to be going through the ringer. Kalen Mason is someone that's got a little bit of experience. He's going to be back for this team. So, that'll be helping out a little bit. But that said, you just take a look at these guys that are not going to be back for them from a season ago, and it's rough for them. It's not even like they were really ripping it up at the non-Division I ranks. They were scoring about 70.8 points per contest. This is a big, giant leap for this team, and it's not like they've been overly amazing at the Division II level. 2 seasons ago, they were able to put together a 23-win season, so they were able to do relatively rock solid there, but last 2 years, they were below 500. How can we have any expectations for this team? They don't have a lot of size. They don't have Division I athletes. This is just going to be a rough year for them in general. So I'm sorry, but Ted Hutling, I think that he's going to be doing a solid job as a coach. He's going to do everything that he can, but he's fighting an uphill battle here. So dead last, in terms of my projector or finish out here in the NEC, we are going to be going with New Haven. At number 9, I have to go with Mercyhurst. Mercyhurst just had a rough season last year. Now, Milos Ivanauskas, he's going to be back from a season ago, and Ivanauskas, I think, is going to be able to do a solid job of being able to provide for this team. He's got some relatively good size, better size than most of the other guys on this roster, right around about 6'8". He was putting up there 4.5 points, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range, so that's a good place to be able to start. But for Mercyhurst, they were well outside the top 300 in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis. Now, to their credit, they actually went 9-7 in the conference last season, but no more Jeff Planutis, no more Shimon Rathan Mays. Jake Lulleman, he's your top returning scorer at about 5.5 points per contest. They lost each of their top 4 scorers from a season ago because they all graduated. Deshaun Jackson, a guy that was able to give the team 3.5 points per contest, he's going to be looked to really run the show for this team. They really didn't bring in anything via the transfer portal, so I do think that this is going to be a little bit of setback after they had a nice triumph last season within the conference. So at number 9 in my projector finish, I am going to be going with old Mercyhurst. At number 8, I'm going to be slotting in there Fairleigh Dickinson. For Fairleigh Dickinson, you just lose all those top flight scorers from a season ago, and now it's going to be shouldered by Deshaun Jackson to really help this team out, along with Melson. Melson and Jackson are a pair of 6'6", a little bit of combo players that should be able to do a little bit of this and that for the team. Melson last year was over at Chattanooga. He only averaged about 3 points per contest last year for his career. He has been about a 37% three-point shooter, though. 2 years ago, over at Chattanooga, he was shooting more in that neighborhood, about 44% from three-point range. So I do think that there's a little bit of upside there. And then with Deshaun Jackson, he's a guy that throughout his career has been a relatively good producer wherever he's been. I know that he began his career over at VMI, and he's someone I think could be able to go in there and just give you a little bit of pop in general. But for Fairleigh Dickinson, this is just a very different team for them, as they've actually got size. They bring in Cyril Martinoff, who was over at Eastern Kentucky last season. Really didn't see a ton of minutes for them, but he's a true 7-footer that's going to be able to clog things up down low. Typically with this bunch, it's all about three-point shooting. It's all about really good guard play for Jackson throughout his career. He's been about a 34% three-point shooter, and I go back to what he did at VMI 2 seasons ago. He was able to average 10.5 points per contest, so should be a nice scorer there. This has always been a Fairleigh Dickinson team that it doesn't matter who the coach is. You're typically not going to get a lot defensively out of this team, but again, you bring in a freshman in Sebastian Hairbro. He's 6'10". He should be able to give the team a little bit of production right away. Arthur Cox is someone that they're going to be banking on to be able to help out the bunch as well. He comes up from the non non-Division I level. He's a little bit of a 6'7" wing that should be able to provide a lot with regards to both outside shooting, and he should be able to give you a bit of rebounding down low, but it just feels like a little bit of a disjointed team, and I don't know who's going to be running the point for this team, and I think that that's going to be very important. Might be Joey Neesmith. Neesmith is someone that comes on over after he was at the non-Division I ranks as well, so I think that this is going to be a year of transition for Fairleigh Dickinson. As a result, I've got them in at my projector or finish at number 8. At number 7, I go with Lemoyne. With Lemoyne, you still have Zach Tekken from a season ago. That's going to be able to help them out, but even when Tekken was getting starts when he was over at Siena, just not necessarily a guy that I love, and he's always been a little bit banged up throughout his career. He's very much a pass-first guy. Last year was able to give you about 3.5 assists per contest, but shot 15% from three-point range. Nate Fouts is back. He was able to give the team 8.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game, so I mean, that's good to be able to have that continuity there, but for Lemoyne, they were well outside the top 325 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They were one of the worst rebound rate teams in all of college basketball. They were unable to really get a lot of second and third chances, and in the offseason, they didn't do the world's greatest job of being able to address that. Now, if you're able to get Fred's Pauls Bagatauskis out there on the floor, which that's a very big mouthful to say, along Tennessee Rainwater, and that's actually his name. First name is Tennessee. His last name is Rainwater. He comes on over after he was in the WAC last season over at Utah Tech. He saw 6 points, 3 rebounds per game as a little bit of a part-time starter. He's actually a relatively solid player down low at 6'6", but Bagatauskis, if he's able to give you a little bit of something, I think that you might be staring at something nice there, as he was able to get out there on the floor for 10 games last season. Not necessarily too much of a rebounder at 6'8", but was able to give the team 6 points per contest, so I think that that's going to be relatively productive for this team. And then Trent Mascara is someone that I think is going to be a big X factor for this team as to where this team is going to be going, as he stands right around about 6'4". He's got the ability to be able to take the top off of a defense and be able to pop it from 3, but he was only able to get out there for 9 games last season, where I mean, he was in a small sample size, pretty solid with about 7 points per contest, was able to give you a few rebounds, but now they're going to be looking for him to be able to elevate, and I just don't know if this team is going to be able to do so. And for Lemoyne, it has been a very shaky defense ever since they've come up to the Division I ranks. So for Lemoyne, I did put them in my projector finish over at number 7. At number 6, I have to go with Chicago State. Now, they do bring in a guy, Marcus Tankersley, who actually began his career out there in the great state of Illinois. He began at Detroit, and he was able to put up some pretty solid numbers last year out there in the SWAC. When he was at Elkhorn State, he had 10.5 points per contest, and keep in mind, over at Detroit during the 2023-24 campaign, he was averaging 16.5 points per contest. Career 24% three-point shooter, so he leaves a lot to be desired there, but you know what? You've at the very least got something there, and for this team, they've actually got returning players. Noble Crawford and Deshaun Jean Charles, both of these guys should be able to step up. They should be able to give you a little bit of production, as these are guys that are holdovers that were a big reason why Chicago State was a little bit more respectable towards back half of the season last year. Crawford was able to give you 9.5 points, 4 boards, 2 assists, so a little bit of stat sheet suffer that shot 35% from 3-point range. Troy McCoy Jr., he was able to see a little bit more production towards the back half of the season last year as well. 7.5 points per game. Not necessarily a great 3-point shooter, but you know what? You should be able to get a bit of something there. And then with Gene Charles, he was pretty much just out of the fold for the team last season, but I mean, this is a guy that's very familiar with the program. He should be able to step in there right at 6'7" and be able to give the team what they need, rebounding, because they just did not have a lot of size last season. 2 seasons ago, when he was over at Chicago State, he was averaging about 5.5 points, pulled in there 3.5 boards, was able to give the team a bit of versatility. He doesn't necessarily shoot it well from 3, but he should be able to give the team a little bit of added size, and it does feel like this Chicago State team in year number 2, without having Mr. Gerald Gillian under Scott Spinelli, they should be able to get the ball rolling here. So I do have Chicago State in at number 6 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 5, I am going to be going with Stonehill. With Stonehill, they do lose quite a few pieces from that backcourt, along with Todd Brogna from a season ago. Now, Will Batchelor is a guy that a few seasons ago was a really good producer over at Holy Cross. He was a starter for 2 seasons. As a freshman, he was averaging 12.5 points, shot 40% per 3. Took a drop off as a sophomore, 8.5 points, still shot 37.5% from the outside. Really doesn't give you anything with regards to rebounding. Missed all of last season due to injury, but he should be one of the better guards in this conference. But it's all about Chad Stinson along with Herman Coffey. What are these guys going to be able to give you moving forward? As hopefully I said that last name correctly. If it's not Coffey, it's Kofi, but Herman Kofi, he last season was able to give this Stonehill team right around about 37% three-point shooting, 9.5 points, and assists and a half per contest. Now, Stonehill does need to do a better job of being able to generate turnovers. They were very poor with that regard, and for Stonehill, they themselves returned the ball over about 12 times per contest, an improvement from their first year at the Division I ranks, but they certainly definitely leave a little bit of something to be desired there. But you've got Chad Stinson who's back. He's able to give you about 8.5 points, 5 boards per contest. They really need him to be able to hit the boards because this is a very undersized team. Even for this conference, you've got Corey Lavelle who comes in at 6'10". He should be able to give you a little bit of something. And Rex Sutherland, I think, is a very intriguing piece as well, as he's a guy that throughout his career has just dealt with a lot of general injuries. For Sutherland, he was limited to just 8 games over at New Hampshire last season. 2 seasons ago, was a relatively solid producer off the bench, was able to give the New Hampshire bunch right around about 5 points per game. Ryan Espinosa Guzman, he's going to be able to give you a bit of something at 6'8" as well, but I don't have quite the same amount of 3-point shooting as a season ago, though I do like the way that Sonil has been able to make this transition up to the Division I ranks, so I do have them at number 5 in terms of my projector finish. And number 4, we've got St. Francis of Pennsylvania, the team that made the NCAA tournament last season. Now, they were only 500 in conference play, but I felt like they were really able to find their form towards the back half of the season, and they've got one of the best transfers in this conference, and that would be Skywicks. With Skywicks, this guy I think is going to be able to come in right away and give this team some production. Did not see a lot of minutes over at UTSA, meet for the Roadrunners last year, but you go back to what he did at a lower level 2 seasons ago over at Incarnate Word. 13.5 points, 6.5 boards, able to shoot about 31% from 3, which, considering he's a 6'6", 200-pound load, he should be able to dominate down low, being able to have that inside-out game. That's something that you don't find a lot of in a NEC conference that, let's call it what it is, just not necessarily one of the highest levels of competition that you're going to find in all of college basketball, but you have quite a few guys that returned from a season ago, like a Chris Moncrief. He's solid out there at 6'6". He's able to give you a little bit of rebounding as well. Zion Russell is someone that comes in from Niagara, where he was averaging about 7 points per game last season. From 3-point range, shot about 35% from 3. He should be one of the better guards in the NEC. In my opinion, you're going to have a little bit of a lack of depth, but Cameron Tweedy is someone that's very familiar with the conference. He comes on over from Fairleigh Dickinson, and if I'm not mistaken, he was a part of one of those Fairleigh Dickinson teams that knocked off Purdue in the NCAA tournament as well. And then Ahmad Harrison is someone that really does catch my attention as well. He comes in after he spent a year over at Fordham this last season, and I think that he can be an instant contributor. He was just buried on their bench a little bit, so he was a guy that I thought had a little bit of upside, spent some time at the Division I rank. Now he's going to be back up at the Division I level, and I think that this is going to be a solid backcourt, probably going to leave a little bit of something to be desired with regards to depth down low, but having a guy in Skywicks, I think is going to be able to keep this team towards the upper half of the conference. You did have quite a few defections after St. Francis announced that this was going to be their last year at the Division I rank, but I do think that they're still going to be rock solid in this conference. So in terms of my projector finish, at number 4, I am going to be going with St. Francis of Pennsylvania. At number 3, I do go with Wagner. Wagner loses a lot from last year. Might not be the world's worst thing, because Wagner was a bottom 10 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Always a rock solid defensive team. This goes all the way back to when they had Bashir Mason at the helm. They bring back Xavier Fitch from a season ago, who was able to give the team about 4.5 points, 4 rebounds per game, and unlike a lot of teams in the conference, you know that Wagner is going to do a solid job on the glass. You know that they're going to be fighting for those rebounds. Donald Copeland has done a nice job of just being able to have these guys just being able to fight for every single rebound and always giving it their all there. But what are you going to be able to get talent-wise out of some of these guys? Dorian Nick Jones is a guy that I think is going to do a nice job at the, shall we say, point guard spot. Travis Gray is someone that comes over from Florida National. They're going to need him to play some big minutes, but I think that he's going to be able to do so. For Mr. Gray, last season was able to average about 4.5 points when he was over at Florida National. He was a part of a defense that was very good at generating turnovers as well, so I do think that that experience is going to be able to serve him well here, but you still have a lot of question marks with regards to just the overall guard play, because everyone on this roster, other than Dorian Nick Jones, is pretty much above 6'5", so you're not going to be able to have a lot of guard experience out there. They should be able to do a nice job down low. Benel Basile, who's 6'8", he should be able to give you some nice rebounding as well, but I just don't know where that backcourt play is going to be coming from. And for Wagner, I think that defense and that defense alone is going to keep them towards the top of the conference. So I do have them at number 3 towards my projector finish. At number 2, I do go with Central Connecticut. Central Connecticut brings in an impactful transfer in Gabe Spinelli. We saw what he was able to do over at Chicago State last season. Actually, the coach's son over at Chicago State last season. So interesting that he's still going to be playing within the conference against his father from time to time. But 9.5 points, 3 assists per contest. He's going to do a nice job of being able to run the point for this team. He was able to shoot a little bit over 38% from three-point range as well. And then you got Darren Smith Jr. back from a season ago as well. Darren Smith Jr., one of the few holdovers from last year's team. You had a lot of guys decide to transfer elsewhere, what have you, but this was a guy that was able to shoot 46% from three-point range at 6'7", albeit he wasn't launching a bunch of threes, but he was launching about 2.5 threes per contest, 7 points per game, and a little bit of a reserve role. They're going to need him to step up and to be a little bit more of a starter, but the way that Patrick Sellers has built up this program, in year number 1, it was 8 wins and then 10. They take the leap up to 20. Last year, they go 25-7, and they were a rock-solid defensive team. I absolutely love the way that they've been able to do this the right way, albeit you lose so many players from last season, so it's going to make it a little bit rough. James Jones, 6'6", a little bit of a combo player, only saw about 2.5 rebounds per game last season. He's going to need to step up for them in a big way, but I do think that he's going to be able to do so. You've got a 6'8" big man in Daniel James, who comes on over from Monmouth. He was only out there for about 19 games last season, so they're going to need him to be fully healthy, but I think that that's going to be able to help them out a little bit. Max Frazier is back after he at 6'9" was able to see a few solid minutes. He was able to give the team about 3 rebounds per game. I think that this team is going to be solid down low. You have some question marks with regards to who's going to be bringing up the ball. You've got some question marks with regards to that guard play, but Gabe Spinelli, he does a great job of being able to really shore that up, and I do think that Central Connecticut going to be one of the better teams in this conference, so I've got them at number 2 in terms of my projector finish. At number 1, though, I do have to go with LIU Long Island. The fact that you've got Greg Gecko Gordon into the fold, this is just absolutely tremendous for this bunch. As for this Long Island team, I feel like they're just built right, as well as Gerald Gillian, the associate head coach with Hot Rod Strickland. These guys have done an absolutely tremendous job of being able to build this up. And you got Chardrick Lassou back as well. He was able to give the team 7.3 rebounds per game. This was one of the few teams in the conference that was really able to excel on the boards. They should be able to do so once again this season, but getting back to Greg Gecko Gordon, he just was unable to get out there on the floor last season over at UAB, but keep in mind, 2 years ago when he was over at Iona, was limited to 24 games, but 16 points, steal and a half, 7.3 rebounds per game, shot about 33% from 3, which the NEC doesn't have a lot of great 3-point shooting, so that's going to be more than passable on this roster. You've got AJ Neal, who's back in the fold as well. I love the game of AJ Neal. He's a former top 275 recruit. Last season, he was unable to get out there on the floor, so that was a little bit rough for him, but I think that there's a ton of upside after he began his career over at Long Beach State. We saw him at Chicago State a few seasons ago, be able to give that team about 5 points in a reserve role. He should be able to step up right away, be able to give this team some great minutes, and the fact that you've got Malachi Davis back as well, a guy that was able to average about 17.5 points per game, was able to throw in there about 3 assists per contest as well. This is a team that no longer has Strickland sons out there, but you know what? You've got some really good guard play, and the Ruby Kowale at 7'2" should be able to dominate within this conference. Zini Lee at 6'9", he's a guy that's going to be able to give you a little bit of versatility as well. Mason Porter Brown is a guy that I think has a little bit of upside coming up from the non-Division I ranks as well, so I think that this LIU team is complete. I think that having Gerald Gillian as the associate coach actually makes this team the best coached team in the conference as well. So number 1 in my projector finish in the NEC, we're going to go with Long Island, and that'll wrap things up for the NEC Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. A big thanks to Ryan Peters. He does such great work taking a look at this conference every single year over at Blue Ribbon Yearbook. You join me in segment number 2. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.